to let everybody sit down here in a moment, but I want to say one thing here. So, Steve Roach, Kathleen Corbet, Brian Hetherington, we're all part of a conversation this morning. I'm not going to introduce them by their bios because that would take the whole 45 minutes. So if you're really interested in seeing what they've accomplished, you can read it somewhere. It's all over the line. This morning, we're going to gather and have a conversation as part of our Fully Alive series. The glory of God as a human being, fully alive, right? And money is a major part of our lives. It's the second thing that Jesus spoke the most about. And the goal of our lives is to integrate the wholeness of our lives together, the whole so that we can live holy lives completely one in Christ. And so we're going to have some conversation about that. Last week, Reverend Elizabeth gave a review of what it says in the Bible about money in a 45-minute review. Really well done. I'm going to even take that. I'm going to turn it into basically 1 minute here. So when we think about the biblical teachings, we think about the summary of the law, to love the Lord your God with all your heart and your mind and your soul, and your neighbors yourself. Jesus said, this is the whole of the law and the prophets, right? All the traditions would agree on this. And the basic teachings about money are A, don't make money a god. That would break the first commandment. And second, use it to love your neighbor. And there it is. The whole Bible in 2 sentences. So why don't we sit down and start our conversation here. And we'll have some time, and later everybody can join in and ask you guys some questions. And as we spoke on the phone, I hope you'll ask each other questions. But to get started, Kathleen, you and I had dinner together in Jerusalem. I didn't even know when that was anymore. Some blur of days and nights ago, and we sat together and talked about this, about what we might say. And so I'd like to start with you, just what we talked about in Jerusalem. What is it that comes to mind when with the word money? How do you think of money?
How do I think of money? Well, what Father Peter didn't tell me is that you'd go first, and I've been thinking a lot about this. I'm actually sorry that I missed Elizabeth's comments last week. But what came to mind when I was talking to Father Peter was really from an early age. I think I was raised, my dad was a teacher, my mother was a nurse, and being fully alive to us was, giving all of what you have to everyone, to your family, to your community, and from an early age, that's just really what I've done. And when I went on to be in financial services, I'll talk more about that in a while. But I was on the board of my university, and I remember the chairman of the board came to me and said, and I said, what can I do? I'll do anything that nobody else wants to do. And so that usually means you go on advancement or audit or what have you. But what I learned from that is what he shared with me, which is, I think, from Luke's gospel. And that is for all that, you're going to have to correct me, Father Peter, but for those who have given much, much is expected, much is required, and oftentimes much is demanded. And that's what fully alive means to me, and that's what I hope to share.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'm just going to have you add one other thing. So when you had talked about money, and you just said a word about flow. I wonder if you might just say a word about flow, and then
okay. So I'm still a little jet lagged. But when Father Peter asked me about sort of what role does money play in my life, I really think about it as really a flow. It's a resource. And whether it's time or treasure, money, it's something that I'm blessed to receive, and I also feel that it's my obligation to give. And so it's all about everything that we have, whether it's water or heat or food or money. It's about giving and receiving, and it's about flowing through your life. And so that's why I've never sort of separated it as a separate resource or something to be coveted or something to be hoarded, but something to flow through my life.
Yeah, thank you. So Steve, you've been an economist, your vocation is an economist, and so you've looked at money from both sides now, as that 60s song said, right? I mean, you're from every different possible light, but I wonder if you might comment on that. Joni Mitchell, thank you. So money, how you think about it?
Well, you're right. Is this working?
If you hold it close to your mouth, it really works.
Okay. I'm sort of inhaling it.
That's good. You and Mick Jagger, okay? So
Okay.
yeah.
In any case, it does permeate all aspects of what I do professionally, and it has an important role in terms of what I try to do personally as well. But I like the way that I think in the second session of this program where Justin was framing the fully alive construct, he made the important distinction between means versus the end. From what I understand about this program is about addressing the tools that gives us the means to think about that fully alive end. And economics to me is also very end focused. We set up frameworks, problems, models to optimize some lofty goal, but the real story is the means, how we get there. And economics is a social science. It's a people-centric social science. And a lot of my colleagues in this profession that I'm in lose sight of the people-centric nature of this discipline. I try to keep that not always at the top, but near the top of my focus in identifying issues, challenges, tensions, whether it's in a standpoint of income inequality, which is a big debate in this country right now, or us versus China, which is something that sort of consumes my life right now, but all sorts of tensions and issues framed in the context of a people-centric social science. And when people are involved, there's lots of dimensions of the human condition that influence their behavior and the framework that we use as economists. And the spiritual piece of it is obviously very important for some and not that important for others. So we have to factor that into the way that we think about the problems that we're charged with analyzing. So it doesn't quite get to what you're asking for, but that's the best I can start out with. And one point, though, you said that money was the second most important thing that Jesus focused on. I think, the fact checkers are going to challenge you. Elizabeth told us last week it was the most important. Am I right?
Kingdom of Heaven is first.
Oh, God, okay. Okay, it was 11 of 39 parables, right?
Steve, she's on my team. I appreciate that. Yeah. She knows where the money comes from.
Yeah,
okay,
yeah.
Were you kidding me? Okay, Brian. So you have the founder of a wealth management operation in New Canaan. You're a financial pastor, really. You with your people, and so this is the world that you swim in. But personally, how do you think about it? Money as in your lives or in the lives of the people that are coming to you?
First off, I just want to apologize for putting Steve on the spot. He and I were up all night just crying over the Yankees' loss, so we've got to cut him some slack. First or second most, talked about subject.
Right, but do we want to have a moment of silence here or something like that?
Much like Kathleen, I kind of grew up in a family that worked, to make things, make ends meet, to put us through school. You never really thought about it. Just this money to us was just a means to an end. When I ended up completely by happenstance working in finance, thanks to a recommendation from a youth football coach, so that'll tell you how easy it was to get a job on Wall Street in the 1980s. It was really about problem solving, what we did. It wasn't high finance like these two were in. It was really the gritty work of budgeting, of trying to figure out what are the 2 or 3 things most important to a family broadly, and how and can they do it. So, but it was really studying other investors that kind of started to get me on the right path of how to really define it. And ultimately settled on, I really do think it's just energy, and it's ours for a moment, and then it passes on. And I got turned on to a great investor, John Templeton, early on in my career, and he really preached about the sense of stewardship that we have. This money is ours for a moment in time, as Kathleen was suggesting, and we should make the most of it. And we're likely lucky that we got it. Maybe there is some divine intervention that some of this capital ended up in our hands or the hands of my clients, and we should do the best with it. We should take it very seriously. There's no utility in not trying to do the best with it. And then the last part I'd say is the lessons I learned from working with some of the better business people around. They worked really hard, never to become super rich, just to do their job well. And then what they realized is when they stopped working, they could really do a lot of good by taking a business-like approach to taking on some of the problems, bigger problems in our society. So I'd say I've learned by observation. And then lastly, super lucky that Jane and I are on the same page about this. So we just came on and said, how could this have happened to us? We're so grateful. So we just decided to give more away, get more involved. And it started this virtuous cycle of giving, gaining, being more grateful, giving more, and so on. And I'd encourage people to think about it. It really does work. So.
Well, thank you for that. What a beautiful thing to say, the loop of love, the cycle of giving and receiving. You know, learn, earn, and return is something that the Mormon population talks about as stages of lives. So many people gathered here and in New Canaan and Darien in this neighborhood work in the financial services industry. You know, when you say Wall Street outside of Fairfield County, it doesn't necessarily have good connotations to so many people. And yet all the people here who work in the financial services industry are incredibly good-hearted people seeking a holy goal. I wonder if each of you could just say a word about how you understand your life in the financial services industry as a godly vocation and to help everybody sort of put their Monday, Tuesday, well, it used to be Monday to Friday, but nobody works Monday to Friday anymore. Their Monday to Sunday work lives, how they put that in the context of their spiritual lives, their holy lives, their whole lives before God.
Okay. Thanks, Kathleen.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, but there's a lot to unpack in there. I mean, the Wall Street versus them. You know, that I have to say, personally, I'm pretty defensive on that topic. I tend to personalize it because I think that while, you know, there are clear excesses and problems and, you know, misguided individuals and in some cases companies on Wall Street, that we have, you know, a culture, a society, I think, that is always trying to oversimplify and blame one group or another for the problems that afflict us. And I think it's a lot more nuanced and complex than that. You know, I look back, you know, 10 years ago at the global financial crisis. With the benefit of hindsight, you know, the consensus view, and we have high-profile politicians campaigning right now in the Democratic primary who are absolutely convinced that this was Wall Street's problem. They caused it, and they deserve to be punished for it, and here's how I am going to punish them. And yet, I go back and I look at the crisis, and very much embroiled on the inside of it when it was happening, and to me, it was a manifestation of lots of problems that, yes, did involve Wall Street, but also involved our high-level policymakers and politicians who were making decisions, whether they were setting interest rates or not regulating, doing their job and regulating complex instruments and companies in a way that resonated with the politics of what the broader society wanted. So in some senses, I mean, and I'm sure I'll antagonize some of you by saying this, we did get, to some extent, a little bit of what we deserved, and why we want to turn that on one group, Wall Street, and hold them accountable. So I am still overly defensive on that, and I'm more than welcome to be attacked by any of you on that point.
Well, I'm not going to attack you, Steve, but I will share that sort of my introduction to Wall Street is, and how I thought about it initially was that it was, about investment banking or somewhat, I never went into it thinking, oh, this is a negative field to go into, and I saw it as an opportunity to learn about finance and to learn not only about Wall Street, but more importantly about Main Street, and about how everyone, from the individual investor to the institutional investor, it really relies upon people who participate in this industry to share their knowledge. And so that's really how I approach the industry. I got into asset management quite by accident. I wasn't a football coach, but it was my dad who suggested, really, you got to go into business. And so I did. And I found myself on the asset management side, so actually, helping pension funds and individual investors think about, what their future was and where they should be investing, and doing the kinds of research that was necessary to support that decision. Along the way, as Steve mentioned, there's a lot of contributors to what constitutes what people think about Wall Street, so research, investment banking, regulators, et cetera. And one group was actually the rating agencies. And being on the investment side, I was probably on the fixed income side, the bond side, I was probably one of the largest critics of the rating agencies. Until one day, after being 20 years in the asset management side, I got a tap on the shoulder and said, would you like to come over and be president of the rating agencies? And, I thought, well, geez, take the largest critic and put her on that side. And so I said yes. And I spent 3 years of my life right leading up to the financial crisis, realizing that there's a lot of information out there, and then the most important thing is to make sure that you're educating people about it. And there are a lot of different groups who don't understand the full picture of it. And I saw that there was a tsunami coming, and the louder we started to speak about it, the faster certain elements of Wall Street started grinding out these securities that were inappropriate. I raised my hand. I called Henry Paulson at the time and said, well, wait a minute, we're waving our hands here. Still kept coming out. It was at that point that I made a decision that I needed to do more with my life. There's got to be something more that was called upon me to do. And so I decided in 2007 to actually make a pivot in my life, and to do more in terms of my own investing, but also giving back to the community. So that was an important pivot in my life. But it's something that, as Steve said, it didn't really leave me. Today, if you Google my name, I'm one of the 25 people that caused the global recession. I live with that. I never, try to debate it or whatever. I take it, I accept it, and I try to do my part in terms of communicating to everybody who's willing to hear just what that story is, and it's a complicated one. And I think a lot of people were responsible for it, and hopefully there was an important lesson for us all. There's certainly one for me. And I think that, that's something that, it's something I don't wear on my, as a proud thing, but it's an experience that I'll never forget, and something that I think God asked me to do, and to make amends for that and to teach organizations. I speak commonly among women in particular who are thinking about going through financial services, and to be aware of what our responsibility is, not only to the industry, but to everybody who we serve.
Yeah. So, Brian, that's such an easy thing to follow. Thank you, Kathleen. Thanks, Steve. Yeah.
I would echo what Steve and Kathleen said. Feeling overmatched in a precept room many years ago when people were expounding on the subject that I was just struggling to get, I figured out I need a new plan. So I came up with this plan of finding simple frames to look at the world. And I've been accumulating them over time, and it's served me well in my job to look through all the frames to try to come up with a solution to very serious problems that I was dealing with. But what I now know is there's a big difference between a simple frame and a simple answer. The only answer to a complex problem is a complex answer. And so I think you said it best, Steve. That's the way I look at it. We were all three in the middle of this. I'm in a different spot, though, way easier. I am an individual investor working for individual investors. We don't have to own anything. We don't have to manufacture anything. We just have to make deliberate decisions. And we made a deliberate decision 2005 and 6 that there was a bubble brewing. We got really good perspective from different people. One of the observations I won't forget is I asked a friend who was running a big investment bank, how's it going, what bothers you? And he said, we can't make enough AAA. What do you do with that? You run. So, and then unfortunately, after everything happened, it was one of the better things that ever happened to my career. I mean, we were in the right spot to do the right thing. And so I'm conflicted as well, but from different, the people like Steve and Kathleen that I grew up admiring because they were one step ahead of me in finance. These are really good people. They were acting in good ways. So I think you're right. It's not, and I've always been on Main Street, not really Wall Street, so I have a different view, but it does bother me also that we're trying to make a simple villain for a very
Peter,
complex problem.
Can we just push this a little further? And I'm going to push, but I can't say that I really have the answer. This is a wealthy community. Big homes and people with great careers. And wealth accumulation, material possessions, whether it's homes, furniture, clothing, or cars, is an important part of the New Canaan, Fairfield value structure that we all inhabit. What I was grappling with and thinking about this topic today is how do we reconcile that fixation? Do we take the means that Justin framed so eloquently in his talk, do we take that to an uncomfortable place that compromises our ability to really appreciate the end? And I don't know the answer to that, but it's something that that I grapple with a lot, and I'm sure many of you do as well.
Either of you want to comment on that?
Well, I mean, I think we are doing ourselves and our families and maybe people who ask us for advice disservice if we don't look at the world as being really abundant and applying that to this topic. I'm not going to take on Elizabeth for her teachings, but I did learn a lot last Sunday, and But I think Christ's message wasn't give it all up. I think, to me, it's make the most of it and do good. And I think, on balance, we shouldn't be so tough on New Canaan as a community, just because they've done okay. So I think there's plenty to go around. We should make the most of what we have for the benefit of others. That message is clear, and I don't suspect because of our zip code that we haven't. I really don't. But I don't have a big enough sample. But the people I see have really done good things by working hard.
I would just add,
I'm not
have
sure.
reason, if I might go off, to be grateful to St. Mark's because through their pilgrimages that I have had the good fortune of participating in, just most recently coming back from Israel and Jordan, I remember sitting in the Wadi Kelt and doing just with the sunrise and just looking at the space that Jesus had walked through, and we were getting ready for Eucharistic service, and these little children, Bedouin children, were in front of us, and while we were going through our service and breaking the bread, and this little 4-year-old girl, no shoes, she was preparing for us so that after the Eucharistic service, she could sell us her goods. And during the service, she was singing at the top of her lungs. And all I could focus on was this little 4-year-old girl. Couldn't be happier than any of us the 33 of us sitting for Eucharist. And I stopped and I thought about sort of where we come from and how very little we see of this in our own community, but how loving this little girl was and how grateful that we were there and how happy she was to see our money. I think she was just counting those. As soon as we pulled off in the bus, she was like counting how many bills she got and couldn't be happier. And I thought, there but for the grace of God go any of us. And here is a young girl who at the age of 4 is learning about business and learning about how to work with people and how to support her own family. And I was grateful to God and grateful to St. Mark's for allowing me to witness that.
That's really beautiful. She stole the show. I thought you were captivated by my sermon. Turns out it was the little kid behind me. I just want to have a word about New Canaan and the sample size, Brian, that you're talking about. So from my perspective, New Canaan is a very complex place. And anytime I hear people denigrating my people, the people of our neighborhood, I say you don't know them. You do not know their heart, and you do not know their holy disposition to do good in the world. All of you gathered here and those who are not here do so much to lead organizations in the world that do good. It's shocking, and I believe in the people of our community who have the gifts and have worked hard to mobilize those gifts for good. So I just want to claim that as a part of our life together. The second thing I also want to claim is that I know, and I know Elizabeth and Justin also know this from the seats we sit in, that not everybody's doing well. That everybody pretty much looks good, but I have to tell you, there is extraordinary pain in our community about people who are not doing well. And these are people that, went to the best institutions, Stanford Business School, they were chief operating officers and this and that, and, particularly those in the fixed income business. It collapsed, wrong place, wrong time, having a hard time rebooting. We talk about the incredible full employment that is unfolding in our country today, but it ain't here. I just have to say that. There is unemployment in our community, and there's underemployment. And the only thing worse than working is not working. And there are many people in our communities who are unable to work and to feel the wholeness that comes from giving and receiving, to get caught in that loop. So it is a very, very complex place. I do believe that, and very complex for so many in the people in the church. So does anybody have a question? Yeah, Dick? So let me reframe that to make sure everyone hears it and they can hear it on the stream. Dick has asked about the corporate structure that one can have in the state of Delaware. and why there's so many incorporations done in the state of Delaware. I wonder if I might broaden that a little bit to some questions that we had talked about earlier. The whole question of what is the purpose of a corporation. I know that when I started in Wall Street, I worked for a guy who was a long-time Wall Street guy and had been a professor also at NYU, and he used to say, you're maximizing shareholder value, and now we're moving into a time where a lot of people are questioning the size, power, strength of corporations, and do they have a social value? I would say the corporations are definitely not Christian. The question is, do they have a social element to them? And it's a big conversation. I don't know if we can touch it for a little bit. Steve, I'm going to start with you since you're the one who knows all the answers about the economy. Yeah.
Well, I just go back, Peter. I mean, what the question raised again is a value proposition of corporate responsibility that is a reflection of the body politic that frames it. And so, the shareholder value mindset, goes way, way back to delivering returns to the ultimate owners of corporations, who are individuals or institutions that are acting as proxies for the individuals. And now there's a new movement of corporate responsibility that I believe all the members of the so-called business roundtable, with one exception, who I won't name, have signed on to a broadening out of the shareholder value to a more responsible culture, to take other more humanistic considerations into mind, recognizing that there's been some egregious transgressions by corporations over the last few decades that have taken us away from what we're trying to accomplish with our structure. So I wouldn't blame Delaware. I would blame a political system that allows and encourages that type of structure to occur. Is it going to change? I'm pretty cynical on that. I really, even though there's been a groundswell of support to shift the value proposition of corporations to this more humanistic direction, I honestly don't think it's going to happen. I think that corporate managers and the institutions who are the bulk of the shareholders in the United States are going to continue to demand return. And we're in a low return world, which gets to the money issue. People, the average person in this room needs return because you're past your prime sort of compensation trajectory. And so, how do you get return in a low return world, especially if your corporations are being asked to move away from fixating, possibly excessively so, on the return aspect of this value proposition?
Yeah. Kathleen?
So I'm going to take a slightly different view, maybe completely opposite, but I'll be nice about it. It is changing. And it's changing because for good business reasons. I serve on 3 corporate boards that this issue, ESG investing, diversity inclusion, et cetera, all of these good reasons for going beyond the corporate law under Delaware law. And it's simply this. This is what our employees are seeking. They want to work for organizations that believe in the greater good. So if I want to run a good business and I want to make sure that I have fabulous employees and the millennials and the Gen X, Y, and Z is coming through, I got to make sure that my values of this organization of serving our customers and supporting our shareholders, it is a continuum of many different constituents, and it all makes good business sense. So if you've got a proposition in terms of what you're seeking to do for your customers, and serving your employees, so they're going to stay with you and be committed to your organization and your values, and your shareholders will benefit from that. So I really think that it's not a blip. I really think that there is a fundamental shift that's going on within organizations, and I'm happy to be part of it.
So Brian, now this is perfect. We're going from the higher level, from economy to the governance, and now people on the street who show up in your office and want to talk about this. Where are you on that, and where are your people on that?
I think this was afoot for a while. This was building. I would also make a quick plug for free market capitalism. I think it does a really good job, maybe better than legislation, to address these really complex issues. Companies who don't act in the best interest of all of their stakeholders are punished nearly instantly now. This notion that institutional shareholders or individuals are complacent about this subject, it's wrong. I can tell you firsthand. I would also say that you don't have to, just because we put a name on it now doesn't mean it wasn't important 5 and 10 years ago. But as an individual investor working for individual investors, someone who can limit their focus, I would just tell you that by pure accident, 90% of the companies that we invest in are on the ESG list. I have never screened for ESG companies. So it's just, when you're looking for high quality companies run by skilled managers for the right reasons, with good outcomes, who treat their employees and their customers and their supply chain well, you end up with, you get it going. And the moment they don't, it breaks. On the other hand, sometimes there's opportunity, not to be shallow, in buying a good company when something bad happens and they bring in a new, very skilled manager to correct the problem. The problem with that is you have to wait. But I found that the waiting is really the best part. That's the key thing. So I'd say as investors, we've been working on it for a long time. And it is important. You know, I hope, and we may want to get to more questions, but you know, one thing I'd be just remiss in saying is to go back to Peter's kind of questions to the three of us prior to today. You know, being deliberate about making good decisions, you know, has been around a while, and I, you know, I personally pray every morning to have good judgment, and not just for my family, but for the people who I work for, people who work with me, you know, and then the community. It's a silent prayer, but I think a lot of people do that. And so I don't think this question of stewardship of money and being a good person are separate. And I think you can, like we learned, go all the way back to the search committee. Thank you, Cindy. When you ask for help, you get it in the Christian faith. And I think, so I'm just trying to do that in a really little way. And I would encourage others to do it too.
Beautifully said. Back to the search committee. You know, the reason I got called is because I said when I was a kid I wanted to be the chief economist at Morgan Stanley, and you said I know something about that. That was very funny. So we're down to 3 minutes. I wish we had 3 hours. But before our time evaporates here, do any of you have a word that you would like to share that I haven't talked about? And if not, I'm going to ask them. But I mean, if you have something on your heart that you would like to say, Brian, what you just shared was absolutely beautiful and touching, and that I believe is the core truth of things, that these are good and holy people trying to do a good and holy thing more often than not, and that the positive nature of the people in the financial services industry trying to do a good thing is the unspoken truth that is missed by much of mainstream media. Yeah. Anybody with either have a word?
I'll just repeat very briefly. We have sort of the role as individuals and then our corporate identity. And I think a lot of us, I would say, I have suffered from this from time to time myself, but I try to stay focused on it, to not let the corporate identity beat down your personal value proposition, which is grounded spiritually, is grounded in your education, your experience, and your family. That tension between the corporate and the very human role that we play is a big challenge, and it's always been something that I've thought about.
So we're going to ask each of you, but I just want to say a moment. Editorial writer just wrote the second Mountain. Help me out here. David Brooks. I mean, that's what David Brooks is talking about. Those of you who read his book, I've not read it all cover to cover, but it goes down very easily. A little bit about that. You know, where is the self in the midst of the corporate structure? Yeah, beautifully said. Kathleen?
And I guess where is the self? I think it's fully alive. I think it's being able to pull it all together in terms of who you are, who you represent, and what you provide. So it's sometimes can be confusing looking at it all, and it seems like love and finance are two completely opposite things, but really they're whole, and they're really about being fully alive, and that's why I appreciate that this is what we're doing here at St. Mark's.
Well, from a practical standpoint, I went to a Catholic high school in the 1970s, and taught by brothers who took vows of poverty. And the most important class that they stressed was accounting.
Hilarious.
Enough said.
And you have devoted a tremendous amount of your life to raising money to keep those brothers in business who have taken a vow of poverty. The amount of time you've put in to raise money for your old high school up there in Middletown is a beautiful thing. Okay, everybody, I'm sorry to say our time is done. I wish we had 3 hours for three most incredible people. So thank you all, and peace and blessings. Yeah.